Hi friends, my name is Jessica. This is our channel, Copper Desert Homestead. I'm working on the garden a little bit and I thought, why not share some of my successes and some of my failures gardening in the desert. At this point, I have had plenty of failures. I've been intentionally gardening, meaning actually seeing it through and not forgetting about plants and letting them die for the last 2 years. So by no means am I an expert gardener, but I'm coming at this video as someone who is trying, someone who has read some good books. And if you follow this channel, you know we are in the process of moving from the suburbs, which is where we live now, in Las Cruces, New Mexico, to our land in Arizona. It's raw land, and we are going to be building a homestead using permaculture practices, and we're going to try and be as off-grid as we possibly can. So that's why I'm really taking gardening seriously, because I'm hoping to be able to have a very successful garden with annual and perennial plants, meaning plants that you plant every year and plants that come back every year, and to feed our family. So I wanted to share some of this with you and also give you some book recommends at the end. Without further ado, let's get into it, because I know you're here to hear about desert gardening. So last year was my first big year, and I think I failed in almost every way I could. I'd say most of my research was probably through YouTube and the internet. My kids are still little, so it is harder for me to find time to sit down and read. Although this year I'm making the time to do that, and I think it's already paying off. Some of the things I did. One was, when you're in the desert, it does heat up quick once it decides to heat up. I started my seeds way too late. I started them indoors in late April, which they should have already been transplanted outside so that they could grow and become stronger, so that they're more resilient when the heat does come. I planted them outside when it was already hot, and a lot of them just totally fried. They weren't strong enough to handle it. You know, on the back of the packet, it'll say full sun, at least 8 hours. And so I'm thinking, okay, full sun, at least 8 hours. I can do that, easy. It's the Southwest, it is very sunny here. But full sun in the Southwest should not be full sun. It's actually not a bad idea to have some partial shade covering, or to buy actual shade covers, and you can get them at varying thicknesses depending on your climate. So I did end up buying some kind of plastic woven covers that I arched over, and that seemed to help cool them down. However, some of the damage was already done. Another thing I did not do was I didn't mulch, which that's just a totally newbie mistake. Mulching is essentially on top of your soil, laying down a covering. It could be wood chips, pine needles, dried leaves, straw, over the soil, and of course the plants are coming through, and what that does is it keeps the soil cooler and it retains moisture. One of our biggest challenges in the Southwest is evaporation. Because it's so hot, the water just wants to go from its liquid form to its gaseous form and evaporate into the air. So mulching is very important. The next mistake I made was not watering long enough. So I was doing a mixture of hose watering, and then also in my garden beds, I had a pipe that went down to the bottom of them. Where our raised beds are, the bottom is still there. I know a lot of people do raised beds where there is no bottom, but just because ours is placed on our deck, it does have a bottom. So I would fill it from the bottom, and that actually did last a while. But sometimes I would forget to fill it from the bottom, or I was just in a rush and it takes a little while. So I would spray on top, and to me it looked like it was fully saturated. But had I taken the time to just dig down a little bit, I would have seen that it wasn't. So a lot of times you want to water for longer than you think. So if you're doing hose watering, you probably want to water for about 10 minutes. If you have soaker hoses, you probably want to have those on for about 30 minutes, just because they take longer. Okay, what else did we do? Okay, my last and biggest fail was pests. So I finally did have some stuff that was growing well, and then I had aphids and also these green little slugs, which I'll try and look up what those actually are and put that in the video, that just went to town, especially on my brassicas, so things like broccoli, cauliflower, and they were just demolished. So yeah, I learned a lot. And then, one more failure was not checking the weather. So I finally had a ton of tomatoes that were going so well, and an early frost hit and demolished those also. When you're starting gardening, I went into it thinking this is an experimental year. Probably the next 5 years are going to be experimental years, and knowing that I was going to have failures. I had more than I had expected, but that was just part of the naivety of being a beginner. This year, things are looking better, though still not perfect. We've already had some failures. One of which I'm looking at one of my grow bags now, and I think my baby got into it and dumped out a bunch of soil. So protect your plants from small children and animals as best you can. We've had some successes. I started my seeds indoors in February, so they were already big and tough enough to be transplanted. It is now March of 2024, and they've already started to grow, which is really exciting. I've noticed that the more cold tolerant plants, because it is still chilly here, are growing faster. So like my lettuces are growing faster. I have transplanted my tomatoes and they're doing fine, but they're not growing as much. So I suspect because they're more heat loving, they'll start to grow once it warms up. So keep that in mind too. Like my celery is going crazy. But let me say, those aren't from seed this season. I actually left them in my garden from last winter, and I just noticed they never froze. So I thought, well, I guess I'll just leave them. And they didn't really grow over the winter because it's cold. And now that it's warming up, they're almost ready to harvest. So that's really exciting to have a vegetable that's almost ready. The other thing that I think probably could have gone better is our compost, because I just top dressed, which means I sprinkled about an inch or two of compost on top of our beds to give the soil more nutrition, because your plants need nutritious, healthy soil. They need sun and they need water. However, I think our compost wasn't fully mature, because I've noticed a few things sprouting. So you don't want to have too many seeds in your compost. However, if you do have seeds, your hope is that your compost heats up enough in the process of decomposing so that those seeds get heated up to the point where they're not viable anymore. When we have chickens, we'll also let our chickens turn some of our compost, and they like to eat the seeds. So those are two ways to prevent seeds from sprouting up in your compost: heat, chickens. The plants are growing well, so I think it's going to be okay. I'm just having to be vigilant when I check my garden and just pull any little sprouts that I see popping up. Another thing you might think is, why would you want to prevent sprouts from popping up? Those are potentially more vegetables. But since our garden are small, this is another mistake I made last year, was I planted too many. Because as a beginner, you think, oh, I have all this space, but these plants do grow large. I mean, you can obviously fit more carrots or more lettuce or more beets, something that when it's mature isn't too big, into one space, whereas a zucchini plant can get huge. We're a family of 5. We would probably be good with maybe 2 zucchini plants, depending on our goals for food storage for the year. I think I did do better with my spacing this year, so things shouldn't get overcrowded. It takes putting in the effort and the experience, and also not becoming defeated by your failures, just accepting that as part of the experience. Okay, let's talk about books. I have 3 here. The first one I want to talk about is called The 7-Step Homestead by Leah M. Webb. I'm really enjoying this book. I'm almost done with it. This was one I got from the library earlier, and I didn't have time to finish it, but I liked it so much I bought it, because that way I can have it as a reference and I can highlight and make notes and make it my own. What I like about this is it is so good for beginning homesteaders, because it gives you 7 steps for creating a smaller garden, but that it's still big enough. So if you don't have, we're on about a little over 18 acres, but if you have an acre, half an acre, this is still very attainable for you. So she has you take small steps. So start. Sorry about that. My camera fell down because there was a breeze. For those of you who don't know, it gets super windy in the springtime in the Southwest, especially in southern New Mexico and in southern Arizona. So that's another thing you might want to think about with your plants is building some sort of windbreak. That could be like a hedgerow, it could be a fence, it could be a building strategically placed. So that's another tip and something we will be utilizing. Okay, back to the 7-Step Homestead. I loved this book. The author of this book, her background is she's been gardening for 20 years, worked as a landscaper for 8, studied plant and soil science, and she's been teaching gardening for 9 years. So a good resource to have. What I enjoyed about this was she breaks it down into steps. She warns you not to overwhelm yourself because then you'll end up burning out and giving up. So starting with maybe two larger raised beds, like 4x8, and then adding on every year. What I also liked about this is, so some of the books I looked at were really speaking at this level for gardeners when I felt like I was still down here as a beginner. It's very beginner friendly. So there are things that I looked into, compost, for example, where it can get really technical and people are talking about nitrogen and carbon and ratios. And you're thinking, man, I thought, how complicated can gardening be? So she has a chapter on composting, and she talks about basically what you want are green materials and brown materials is what it's called. Green materials are nitrogen rich. So what does that mean? It means that if you were to leave these materials on their own, they would start to get a little smelly, a little slimy, they might get moldy. So things like fresh kitchen scraps would be green material, eggshells, coffee grinds, fresh grass clippings, that sort of thing. Brown materials are things that if you left on their own, it would take a really long time for them to break down. Cardboard, wood chips, twigs, brown paper, those things are high in carbon. The trick is to mix the two together so that the green stuff helps the brown stuff break down and the brown stuff helps the green stuff not get putrid. You want your compost to smell earthy, is how she describes it. So that was really an aha moment for me as to how to tell if something's high in carbon, how to tell if it's high in nitrogen, how to tell if my compost is healthy. So that's an example of what she does in this book. And I definitely recommend this for beginners. The only downside for me of this book is it's not in our particular climate, but I think a lot of it translates to any climate. So this was really good. And it just kind of helped decrease the overwhelm of starting something new. The next book I want to talk about is called Rainwater Harvesting for Drylands and Beyond. This is by Brad Lancaster. This is the second volume. Jag's reading these and he is really enjoying them. A lot of people have asked what we're doing for electricity, what we're doing for water. We're going to have a lot of videos on those coming up. Jag is finishing up his permaculture design certification. It's a pretty intensive 4-month course. His final project is designing our land. So we're actually just waiting for that to be graded by his instructors and then he'll be graduated, which is really exciting. Point being, rainwater harvesting is something we're very interested in, especially being in a desert where every drop of rain is precious. So rainwater harvesting involves catching rain off of any kind of roof to store it into a larger container, but it also involves catching water in your soil. So that means you work your earth, or terraforming can be another word for it, so that water slows down and soaks into the soil as opposed to just running off the top, taking any nutrients along with it and just going downhill. So this can look like swales, it could look like check dams, it could look like trincheras, which we have a video on us building some of those. It's a great way to collect water in the desert. We could do a well also. I know it's possible because all of our neighbors have wells. However, since the water table is not as high and is thriving in the desert as it is in some other parts of the US and the world, we really want to try to do rainwater harvesting. Okay, the last book I was a little bit hesitant to recommend just because it's on my list to read, but I haven't read it yet. However, this one was recommended to me by Megan from Fireside Farms. That's her channel, and she has an awesome channel about gardening in the Southwest, so I definitely trust her recommendation. This is Growing Food in a Hotter, Drier Land by Gary Paul Navin. So just to give you an idea of what's in it, table of contents here, seeking inspiration and solutions from time-tried strategies found in world's deserts, catching runoff as conventionally irrigated agriculture collapses, getting more efficient at irrigation delivery, reducing heat stress in crops and livestock, microbial diversity of food-producing soils. So definitely a great resource to have. So I will leave it at that for now. I know that was a lot of information and I went on a few tangents, but I hope it was helpful. Like I said, I'm still learning myself, but I thought maybe this could be useful information for some of you. Right now it is April of 2020. Well, it is almost April of 2024. The month of April is going to be all about us trying to get our house ready to sell, and interest rates are still a little high, so well, they're still a lot high. So I'm hoping it'll sell in a decent amount of time. And at the same time, we've got a few things we still want to do on the land to prep for us moving out there. We're going to be living in our fifth wheel to start as we build things up. So more information on that to come. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all the support. I read all the comments, even if I don't get back to answering all of them. So just a big thank you to all of our subscribers. See you soon.